much. Can you all hear me? I think we're good. Let me get my eyes out here. All right, so glad to have you all here today. So glad to have visitors with us. Glad to have some of my family here to support me. And a long time ago, Diane and I were going down the road, and there was a little man walking back down the exit ramp at 275 down to Beachmont, and that was pretty dangerous. So we pulled over to see if he needed some help or something, and he was a Bulgarian man, and he couldn't speak English very well, and we're trying to talk to him, trying to figure out where he was supposed to go and what he was doing, and it turned out he was a tailor trying to go to start a job, and he got turned around and lost and didn't know where he was at. And so we're like the ugly Americans. We figured the louder and slower we talk, the easier it is for somebody to understand. But finally we figured out what he wanted. And when he's heading back to his car to follow us to try to get him where he's supposed to be, he was, here we go. That's the words he used. And he said a couple of times as he was walking back to our, here we go. So here we go. I hope the Lord blesses you with the message this morning. And I'm not real experienced speaking from a pulpit, but I've spoken a number of times at different conventions in my work and the things I do in my daily life. But it's much different than the responsibility of bringing a message and trying to touch people's lives. But the last time I was in front of the church and doing a message was a number of years ago, and my older brother Rick, who's here, was somebody who supported me and gave me some advice and let me talk to him about different things. And afterwards, I was excited to call him, and he was asking me how it went. And it seems odd now, but at that time, my first thing was, well, I got a couple of laughs. That to me was success. The people were engaged and we had laughter. Of course, laughter is very important in our lives. But now that I've gotten older, and my walk has gotten a lot closer to the Lord, and things this church has shown me and allowed me to do, I know that's much more important than that. So I just pray that the Lord uses me to bring a message. So what I'm going to talk about this morning is the impact of fear in our lives and how it impacts the life that we live opposed to the life that God would have us to live. And I'm going to do that by looking at the life of David and some of the things that he's done. We'll be in 1 Samuel chapters 18 through 21. We'll look at some verses in there. If I kind of go ahead and flip to there. 1 Samuel chapters 18 and 21. So David's one of my favorite biblical characters because he's very flawed. He's very human. It's very easy to identify with David. At one point in my life, I knew that I needed to learn more about the Bible, so I just started from the beginning and started reading on and got into the kings and things, and started learning about David. It really became real for me and really understood that God speaks to all of us. God has a plan for all of us, and I would encourage you to really study the life of David. We're just going to look at a few things this morning, but the first introduction we have to David is, everybody knows the story of David and Goliath, but realizing that God chose David as the run of the litter. If you're all familiar with the story, that Samuel was to anoint a new king, and he went to David's father Jesse and wanted to meet his sons to see if one of those God would appoint to them as being king. And what did Jesse do as being the father? He brought out his strongest, biggest, oldest son. And God said, that's not my man. And they went down each child. And David wasn't even worth Jesse acknowledging his son and bringing out, because Jesse didn't believe any way that God would choose David as the next king for what he understood a king should be. David was the scrawniest again, run of the litter. But God has a different plan than we have. And he chose David. So we all know that David was the one who slew Goliath. And showed, great courage and things through that. So, but when you talk about fear, as young people, we're less fearless. My mom tells a story. You'll have to ask her if it's true or not. She embellishes all. Apparently, when I was a child, we were visiting my grandfather in Kentucky, and he had a little barn out back, and I like to go apparently and explore it and look through it. And I guess I came out of there and I said something about that a snake sticking his tongue out at me. And apparently I was crawling around in a dark barn and was close enough nose to nose to a snake to see that he was sticking his tongue out at me, and didn't think anything about that. The poisonous snakes that are down in Kentucky. She also tells a story again. I don't remember them, but apparently our neighbors have a very ferocious dog, barked a lot. And it was annoying me at one point. And one time I went over and picked it up by its tail and told it to shut up. So, again, you'll have to ask Mom. But flash forward to today, I'm the individual that would be at the top of Kings Island's Eiffel Tower pinned against the back wall because I'm definitely afraid of heights, that I won't walk out to look over the edge because of that fear. I'm also the person that went in one of my rooms in my house, that we had an attic with a little cutout that you pushed up and get in the attic, and I was in there getting something out, and I was sitting there, and I noticed little shingle droppings or whatever, you scrape shingle, it's got the little things that come off. It was on the bed, and I looked up, and that little door was askew. It wasn't in there right. So I said, there's somebody in my attic, and I'm getting out of here. So I hadn't had any shoes on, I hadn't anything. I ran out, they grabbed my wallet, anything. I got out, and I ran down to my mom and dad's house, or drove down to my mom and dad's house. My dad came up, we had a baseball bat, and we're looking around. And I remember I was in the attic the day before. It had been getting something out, and I'd kicked that dirt down there. So it is funny how, as we age and we mature, we lose sight of that courage, that, I don't know if the stakes get higher or what it is in our lives that changes us. But, I've seen it even in my own children. You see your children and they do a lot of things like you. But I've seen how it pass fear down to my children sometimes. Some things, the way they react to things. And, I can reflect back to times in my life where they're seeing things that I've done and behaving similar things I've done in tough situations. So it's a very human and real reality. We're going to look at David today. But one interesting thing, too, before we get into that, fear not. Any of you that are on Facebook and have that available to you today, I've seen a number of times people have put on Facebook that the phrase fear not or do not fear is in the Bible 365 times. I thought that was really neat, that God would just, I've even said, that's no coincidence. 365 times, 365 days in a year. For every day of the year, God's telling us every day, do not fear. And I manage a number of people, and some of them do go through tough times, and I talk to them, and I've told them that, this is how much God loves you. He tells you every day, fear not. But if you actually go and look at it, in the King James Version, it's referenced 103 times. So someone embellished that a little bit at some point, but it is in there 103 times. So God understands that we as humans can be impacted by that, and His Word tells us that we're not to fear. But we're going to look at David and see how fear affected his life. Okay? We're going to look at 1 Samuel 18, 5 through 7. And this is a time where David had been taken in to Saul's home. Saul has treated him like a son. He has his own son Jonathan, but at many times even has loved and favored David above Jonathan. Because remember, Saul was a king, and he was appointed by God at one point, and so he knew who David was, and he saw how David had been blessed by God, and Saul honored that in the beginning. We're going to look at how things changed a little bit here in 1 Samuel 18:5 through 7. And David went out whithersoever Saul sent him, and behaved himself wisely. And Saul set him over the men of war, and was good in the sight of all the people, and also in the sight of Saul's servant. And it came to pass, as they came, when David returned from the slaughter of the Philistine, that the women came out of all the cities of Israel, singing and dancing, to meet King Saul with timbrels, with joy, and with instruments of music. And the women sang one to another as they played, and said, Saul has slain his thousands, and David his 10,000s. So this is kind of a situation where, David is being recognized, by the people, and he's achieving greater recognition, and Saul sees himself, coming down in the people, and that he's giving up some of his, if not his power, at least his persuasion over the people. And if you look at the next verses, 1 Samuel 18:8 through 9, and so Saul was very wroth, and this saying displeased him, and he said, They have ascribed unto David 10,000s, to me they have ascribed but thousands. And what can he have more but the kingdom? And verse 9, and Saul eyed David from that day forward. So David realized that Saul was very angry. And he knew what Saul was capable of, the power that he had, that with a turn of a thumb, that people's lives could be ended. That he had that power, that there was no one to intervene in what the king decides. So he's very scared. He understands what it means. So how do we respond, in stressful times in our lives? Okay. Do we lash out at those around us? Do we retreat from life? Do we hide from what we have to face? Do we overeat? Do we turn to things that try to make us feel better? How we react is important. And one thing, unfortunately, that's a big part of life today is depression. And just a few stats that I found in my research that, in a 2012 study, it revealed that 30% of Americans suffer from depression. The only other country in the world that has a higher rate would be India. France, the Netherlands, and the U.S. are all at 30%. When you think about that, the U.S. and France, are very well-to-do countries. There's not a lot of, when compared to India and the poverty and all the things, or even third world countries, that our country would have higher rate of depression than what those other countries would have. So, to me that really strikes us at what is it that drives our depression. And I know that, we have so much stuff, that we're so blessed. And when we have depression, it's about losing that stuff, whether it be a job loss or if relationships break apart, that has financial implications, or health, losing health, obviously, is difficult times. And one thing, give a little insight for you wives, daughters, and sons. As a father and a husband, there's tremendous amount of pressure and responsibility that you feel. Things that I've gone through as a parent that, think back of, what I put my parents through at sometimes. It's such a responsibility. We live and die, for lack of a better word, on, the happiness of our children and our spouse. You give yourself away a lot to them. And, I'll share, even though I'm sure he probably doesn't want me to, but, Matthew and Aaron had gotten a new car not too long ago, and in very few months, at a very expensive repair that needed to be done. And and she was without a car. And Matthew's very upset with that. And his reason for being upset was not because of the money and those kind of things, that he was overwhelmed with the need and desire to provide for his wife and to give her safe transportation for her drive, and to know that she had that reliable. And he felt like that somehow he had let her down, that she didn't have that. And it was very touching to know how important that was to him. But that's how we're put together, and it's a very tough thing. So I think it's good for sharing that insight. But again, that can drive to depression, because sometimes your circumstances as a husband and father, some things you can't fix, and you have to deal with them, and it's something that has to be overcome. So the strongest risk factor for suicide alone is depression. That shouldn't be a surprise to someone. There are suicides take the lives of nearly 400,000 Americans each year. 1 every 13 minutes, someone will commit suicide. So think of that in terms of the times that we've just been here this morning. About 4 people would have ended their life in suicide. The almost more surprising statistic than that, for every successful suicide, and using the term successful is kind of difficult, but they estimate that another 8 to 25 people attempt suicide. So depression is very real, and a lot of that depression comes from fear and not understanding and looking past what's happening today to understand the big picture. Okay? So we'll go back to David. He's in the same situation. He's afraid. He knows that Saul's after him. He knows that he's the king and can have his life ended. So he chooses to flee. He actually